Picture a single electron, a particle so small that 1,000,000,000,000 of them could fit on the period at the end of this sentence. Now picture firing that electron at a wall with 2 tiny slits cut into it. What happens next has been confirmed in hundreds of laboratories around the world, and after 100 years, it still makes no sense. Because that electron does something that should be physically impossible. It goes through both slits at the same time, and it gets worse, because when you try to watch it do this, it stops. In the early 20th century, physicists attempting to understand the behavior of very small things, electrons, photons, atoms, stumbled into something that has never stopped being terrifying. They discovered that the rules governing the smallest components of reality are not just slightly different from the rules we experience in daily life. They are completely different. As if the universe at its most fundamental level runs on an entirely separate operating system, one that contradicts everything our senses tell us about how the world works. The experiment that revealed this is called the double-slit experiment. It is one of the most replicated, most confirmed, most extraordinary experiments in all of physics. And its implications are so strange that Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, once said that it contains the only mystery of quantum mechanics. Here is how it works. You take a beam of electrons and fire them one at a time at a barrier with 2 narrow slits. Behind the barrier is a detection screen that records where each electron lands. If electrons behaved like tiny bullets, you would expect to see 2 clusters on the screen, one behind each slit. The electron goes through slit 1 or slit 2, hits the screen, and leaves a mark. Simple, predictable, classical. That is not what happens. Instead, the electrons form an interference pattern, a series of alternating bright and dark bands spread across the screen, exactly like the pattern you see when 2 waves overlap in water. This is the kind of pattern that only appears when a wave passes through both slits simultaneously, interferes with itself, and creates peaks where the waves reinforce each other and troughs where they cancel out. But here is the problem. Each electron is a single particle. It is one thing. A single electron should pass through one slit or the other. It should not pass through both at once. And yet the interference pattern proves that it does. Not metaphorically, not approximately. The mathematics is exact. The electron exists, in some sense that defies ordinary language, in a state of being in 2 places at the same time. Physicists call this superposition, and it is not a gap in our knowledge. It is not that the electron secretly goes through one slit and we just cannot tell which. Decades of increasingly precise experiments have confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the electron genuinely occupies both states simultaneously. It is both here and there until something forces it to choose, and that something is you. When scientists place a detector at the slits to observe which path the electron takes, the interference pattern vanishes. Completely. The electron behaves like an ordinary particle. It picks one slit, passes through it, and makes a single mark on the screen. The moment you look at it, it stops being a wave and becomes a particle. The act of observation changes the physical outcome, not the act of touching it, not the act of bumping it with another particle, the act of gaining information about it, the act of knowing. This is called the collapse of the wave function, and no one, in over a century of trying, has been able to fully explain what causes it. It remains one of the most profound unsolved problems in all of physics. Niels Bohr, one of the founding architects of quantum mechanics, took this result at face value. He declared that it is meaningless to speak of the properties of a particle before you observe it. Before observation, the particle has no definite position, no definite momentum. It exists only as a cloud of probabilities, a smear of possibility, a ghost of what it might become. Reality, in Bohr's view, does not exist in a definite state until someone looks at it. Albert Einstein hated this with every fiber of his being. He spent the last decades of his life trying to prove that quantum mechanics was incomplete. There must be hidden variables, he argued. Hidden information that we simply have not found yet. The electron really does have a definite position. We just do not know it. The universe, Einstein insisted, does not play dice. He wrote letters. He designed thought experiments. He debated Bohr at conferences that became legendary in the history of science. He was convinced that the universe could not possibly be this strange, that beneath the apparent randomness, there must be a deeper layer of deterministic reality waiting to be discovered. He was wrong. In the 1960s, physicist John Bell devised a mathematical test, now known as Bell's theorem, that could determine whether Einstein's hidden variables existed. It was an elegant piece of reasoning that translated a philosophical debate into a concrete experimental prediction. Over the following decades, a series of experiments, most famously by physicist Alain Aspect in Paris in 1982, confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt that there are no hidden variables. The universe really is, at its core, irreducibly probabilistic. Reality does not become fully real until it is observed. Einstein's dice were real, and the universe had been rolling them all along. Now, this is the point where most physics textbooks change the subject. They tell you that quantum weirdness only matters at tiny scales. Once you get to large objects, people, brains, cats, planets, the strangeness disappears. The classical world and the quantum world are separate domains. The border between them lies somewhere around the scale of molecules. Above that border, Newton's laws apply. Below it, quantum mechanics rules. Stay on your side of the line and everything makes sense. This idea is called decoherence. The argument is that quantum superpositions are incredibly fragile. Warm, complex environments, like the inside of a living cell, are so full of thermal noise and molecular vibration that quantum states collapse almost instantly, long before they can do anything interesting. The brain, in this view, is simply too warm, too wet, too chaotic for quantum mechanics to play any meaningful role. Whatever consciousness is, it must be a classical phenomenon. Quantum mechanics need not apply. For most of the 20th century, that argument kept the door to quantum consciousness firmly shut. The brain is a classical machine. Consciousness is a classical phenomenon. Quantum mechanics is irrelevant. Case closed. And then, in 1989, a mathematical physicist at Oxford University kicked that door wide open. His name was Roger Penrose. He had already made fundamental contributions to our understanding of black holes, work that would eventually earn him the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physics. He was considered one of the most creative mathematical minds of the last 100 years, and he was about to propose something that most of his colleagues thought was either a stroke of genius or complete madness. He argued that consciousness cannot be explained by computation. Not now, not ever, not even in principle. And if you are wondering how a Nobel Prize-winning physicist arrived at that conclusion, and what it has to do with the discovery made by a logician in 1931 that shattered the foundations of mathematics itself, that is exactly where we are going in the next episode. Before we get there, if you are finding this series as mind-bending as I think you are, take a second and hit subscribe. I am building something here, a complete map of the deepest question science has ever asked, and you are not going to want to miss what comes next. I will see you in episode 3.